Hey everyone. Hi. My name is Dhruv. I'm a product manager at Yelp. Thanks for coming to my talk on delegating effectively. So, just a little bit about me to begin with. I grew up in Delhi, so at times, if you hear a little bit of an accent, it's authentic. And As far as education goes, I got my bachelor's in computer science from Georgia Tech. And after college, I pretty much joined Yelp as a machine learning engineer, and I've been there ever since. I have undertaken a variety of roles at Yelp. Started as a machine learning engineer, then I switched over to being a data engineer. Then I became a data scientist. Then I became the product manager for the data for one of the data science teams. And as of today, I am a consumer PM. I am the product owner or the product manager for Yelp's business page, search page, and the home screen as of today, as of when this uh, talk is happening. So that's a little bit about me. And Yeah, and I just wanted to talk to you, share some tips with you guys on effective delegation. And I just wanted to remind you guys that these delegation is something that goes beyond just our workplace. It's a very workplacey or professionally sounding word, but the obvious scenario that comes to mind is you're asking a colleague or someone you work with to complete a task on a project you're leading. But you could also be delegating up, like you could be working with your manager on your promotion, and you could be driving that, and you could be handing off tasks to him, and that is also a form of delegation. You could be asking your roommate not to leave dirty dishes in the sink because it annoys you. That is yet another form of delegation. So the tips we'll discuss today can kind of be used, or at least some of them can be used in a broader sense than just a workplace setting. Um, but if you use them at work, then they can lead to you getting larger areas of ownership because people see you as being effective with your time and being able to just manage more. You can also reduce how many meetings you're in or how many emails you have to actively respond to. And if you're in a position where you're leading some teams, then hopefully you have teams that are more motivated to kind of take on the tasks that you're giving them or just be a part of your mission. Yeah, so let's jump in. And I kind of want to like spend a few minutes on some basics that we're establishing, which may be obvious to some of you. And then I want to go through five techniques and examples of how to use them or what happens when you use those techniques. So that's kind of the rough outline. And all right, starting with the basics, I think there's three key kind of understandings or things that need to happen when you're delegating. As the delegator, you want somebody else to do something for you on your terms, in accordance with a deadline you're setting, or in accordance with a method or a quality control criteria that you're setting. The second constraint I see is the delegatee, the people you are delegating to, only want to do something they're motivated to do. Now, either salary is a motivation to get them to do this, or excitement, or they have a relationship with you they don't want to they want to manage, which is why they're willing to do a task you're giving them. And as the delegator, one principle that is kind of baked into some of these things is you don't want them to hate you, is a very strong word, but like you less after you get the job done. And this is kind of trying to balance out. No one likes being bossed around, but you need to get stuff done. And at times, if these are colleagues, people you have to work with for a long time, then you need to get stuff done and get them to stay motivated about future tasks that you may bring to them. So these are kind of the key constraints we're dealing with here, when we're talking about delegation. Um, all right, that was it on the basics bit. Now we can jump into the techniques. But before we do, I just kind of wanted to put a setting in everyone's mind that this is a setting where these techniques have kind of been developed or they're targeted at. I'm imagining most of you are somewhere in US or Canada or a Europe workplace setting, which is like a very westernized office setting. For the most part, I'm imagining you're working on some app or website or software related product as the product manager, and hopefully you have cross-functional dedicated teams that you're working with, such as engineering, design, data science. And by dedicated, I mean they work with you. They're not contractors. And you're working with these people for a year or longer, which means you're repeatedly delegating to the same people. And often enough, you may not have direct authority over them. They may not report to you. You may just be a product manager for a product or a project that these people, that their bosses have lent their authority to you, or you have earned some authority. So that's kind of the setting we're targeting with these techniques. And that's what I've seen to be the most common setting for people in software being product managers, in this audience. So that's what I have in mind when I'm discussing some of these techniques. Um, Starting with the techniques, number one, what I like to do when I'm uh, leading a project which has many sub chunks, and maybe I want to hand off a smaller chunk of that project to someone and delegate that task. Instead of coming up with the exact task that I want them to do, what I'm doing is I'm sharing my goals, like what are the goals of the project, and what are the constraints of that particular task needs to satisfy, and what are the goals of the task with people. And I'm letting them come up with the task or solution that meets these constraints or achieves those goals, rather than prescribing a task. And I'll go into an example with this in a slide, but some benefits of doing this instead of prescribing a task straight up is, the first one is the solution is more likely to work for both parties, because when you're handing over a task, you have just considered your constraints and not theirs. So there is a good chance that there is a constraint on the side of the delegatee that you're missing out on, and you'll just find it out later. And then you'll have to reconsider anyway. So you would have spent some time coming up with this task or this particular solution and making assumptions on top of that solution, which may no longer hold true. So that's some wasted effort on your part, as well as the conversation you have to rethink the solution. Another thing is that as the delegator, you're probably busier and have less time to spend on coming up with the exact solution, or are less of an expert in the area. So when you are giving the delegatee, the person who typically has more time to spend on the task, uh, and understands what's possible in that space much better. Like, for example, an engineer understands what's easy to do with the code, what's hard to do, whereas a designer understands more UX patterns. Um, there is a possibility that they'll come up with a significantly more creative solution. So you don't want to miss out on those as the person leading the project, who's ultimately responsible for how it turns out. But at times you'll see that giving people just constraints and goals is not enough. They're just confused, and they're not maybe understanding it. So sometimes you can propose an exemplar solution, which would have been your prescribed solution to drive clarity, but you should do so with the with the addendum that this is just an exemplar solution. It does not have to be the solution we go ahead with. Um, and some other benefits of this approach are, I've typically seen higher motivation and higher accountability on the part of the delegatee, because they now have more of a stake in the decisions, and the ownership of the solution, because it's not something you told them to do. You didn't you But it's something that partially they came up with. And that's also more enjoyable for the person that the task is being delegated to, because it becomes a thought exercise more than a mundane task. So here's an example. Let's say the project that you're in charge of is to make lunch, and the task you want to delegate is to add sour flour to lunch. Now, in a task being prescribed world where you are listing down the tasks to be completed, the list would look something like: first, procure a lemon, then procure a knife and a chopping board, procure a lemon squeezer, cut lemon, squeeze about 2.5 milliliters of lemon juice on lunch. Now, in this approach, the PM has also spent time understanding the task and proposing a solution and just typing more. Like, this is a simplistic example, but for a more complicated task with more details, the just adding the detail is a substantial amount of time. Um, but here's a different way to look at the problem, when we are sharing our goals and our constraints instead of just the tasks. We're saying, okay, the project is still to make lunch. The delegated goal is to still add sour flour to the lunch. But instead of giving the person a list of tasks, I'm going to share my goals and constraints. The ultimate goal is to add about 2.5 milliliters of lemon juice to the lunch. The constraint is keep the budget for the task under $500, or some budget, any other constraint that you have on your task. And then you're like, okay, go figure it out. And maybe the solution that they come up with is the picture here on the right, which is this spray bottle. They found a spray bottle. They stabbed it into the lemon or lime, and they were able to just spray it. And and this is a creative solution to the same problem. It's not the most obvious solution, and it has some benefits where you're dirtying fewer utensils, your lemon won't dry out because it's cut after a single use. And the biggest benefit is, as the product manager, you did not have to spend time thinking through what the tasks and the solutions are. And you were able to drive more ownership to the person driving the task. Um, that's one example of where sharing goals and constraints instead of tasks are more beneficial. But this can also go badly. For example, the solution they come up with they're like, oh, we can just buy lime juice made from concentrate. And then you discover this additional constraint that actually we don't want juice from concentrates in our lunch for whatever reasons. So because when you're giving another person more freedom, things can go wrong, or things can go, or not wrong, but like they can diverge from maybe what you have in mind, and maybe you discover more constraints that you have as the process goes on. It's good to have regular checkpoints in the solution design process, which could be a week or 6 months long, but like whatever works. Have regular checkpoints when you're giving people freedom to make sure they're still on track and no new constraints have been discovered that you might have previously missed. And it's also good to ask the person to explain their thought process more than the tasks they're working on. So, because a divergence in thought processes just happens earlier rather than the divergence in task. Like, you would have had the thought process, come up with a solution, and done the task, or maybe are about to do the task, at which point you start explaining the task to the delegator. By then, a lot more time has passed. All right. The second technique I have for you is building a culture of ownership kind of before you need to delegate. And this more so works when you are working with the same team and you're delegating to the same people repeatedly. So the idea here is you have your team, you familiarize yourself with the team, and you understand which people are effective owners or effective leaders on the team, and you build out an ownership for them ahead of time, and you coach these people on things like which would have otherwise been your job: stakeholder management, or prioritization decisions and frameworks on how to think through prioritizing, and as well as escalation protocols: when to escalate something to you, or when to not escalate something, or when to escalate it to somebody else. So kind of prepare them to own things. And then within the org, very publicly broadcast that A is the owner for XYZ, to drive ownership and accountability, to make these people feel like they are truly the owners and accountable for these areas, which are smaller areas within your area of ownership. And if you're able to tie what people are passionate about to what they own, you typically get better results. Um, And here's an example of when something like this would help. So about 3 to 4 times in my day, I will get an email from a director or a VP or someone higher up at Yelp regarding something in my area of ownership. Hey Dhruv, why are reviews being weird if I try to read them underwater? And like I don't know why, but it's the higher ups that are finding the most like um, rare bugs that happen in the most unusual of circumstances. As the PM, you're going, Mr. Director, thank you for flagging this. Let me get back to you before the end of week. Then you send an email or a meeting invite or a Slack message to the engineering manager or the developer who's familiar with the feature or the space. You talk to them, you explain the details and the context. Then they maybe have to go do some digging, and you agree upon the deliverables and a timeline, and then you report the timeline back to the director. Now imagine if you have a large enough area of ownership with enough just things, enough users, that something or the other is being discovered that does go wrong. So 3 to 4 times a day you're getting an email like this, and that over your career could add up to a few years of your life. Now fortunately, we have this technique of ownership that adds years to our life and life to our years, where we do this one time conversation with our team, where we are building this ownership culture, and we're maybe talking to a tech lead on our team, telling them that they're awesome, and reviews is an important part of the business, and you want them to own reviews, as they know a lot about it and they're super passionate about it. And you're also coaching them on how to do stakeholder management, where you're telling them um, that if you as the delegator add them to a thread with a director or a VP, try to respond within 6 hours, give them like a one sentence status update, one sentence description, and a way to track progress. And you're telling them, if anything is unclear, make sure you Slack me, so that um, things don't seem unclear, or you don't look bad in front of your senior stakeholders. And this is a one time conversation I have with the people on the team. And then let's say this culture has been built. Then the next time I get an email from a director, hey, why are reviews being weird if I read them underwater? All I have to do is add the engineering manager and tech lead for that area to the email thread. And the tech lead, because they have this coaching, are responding with, we are working on this. There is a leakage in our data pipeline, which is making the database wet during underwater use. Fictional example, nonsensical example. And here is a ticket or a Slack channel to track progress on the fix. And the directors, thanks for the update. Glad you're all on top of this. So the directors or the VPs or the senior higher ups are still like bringing things to my attention, or have questions 3 to 4 times a day. But the amount of time I need to invest is significantly lower per issue, because I've made that one time investment. Um, all right, so that's number two. Jumping on to number three. This one might seem obvious, but it's so critical, I still want to mention it. Have trackers in place. And I'm not saying just for your engineering team, which probably has a ticketing system, but like every small thing you are delegating to any small, like any person maybe you're not even working that frequently with. Try to have a tracking system on the tasks that are going into either a project or that you are delegating. It could be a spreadsheet, it could be a ticketing system. Try to avoid post-it notes. I think like post-it notes is what I've seen a lot of people default to if they don't invest in tracking system. And something electronic, something like a website, something that has a browser. uh, and the idea is that like a lot of people will go to a lot of meetings, and the words that you say, they say, will dissipate. But things like tabs in their browsers or emails they're getting from these tracking systems will persist and be there, like as a reminder to do. And in case they did not make a post-it or write it in their notebook, it's still there. Like the delegation, the electronic delegation has gone as a push from you, rather than needing to be a note they have taken as a pull on their own. um, and if the system is nicely done, people also get a dopamine kick out of like checking a tick box or marking something as closed. So they're also likely to, once you have something in place, people will engage with it, is what I've typically seen. And where this helps is it helps catch mismatches in timelines or task expectations or prioritizations. And it makes you more effective at driving deadlines, because at some level you are probably managing a project that has a lot of interlocking pieces or interdependent pieces. And if one of the pieces is delayed or malfunctioning, then that will affect the other pieces, overall delaying the whole project. So it'll help you catch those things much sooner rather than after problems have become larger. And then another added benefit of trackers is you can use it to drive the perception, if you just share it with your boss or your higher up stakeholders, that your team is very organized. And even to team members, that like, hey, listen, we have all of our tasks in one place and we exactly know what we need to do and what is success and what is completion. So it just makes everyone feel like, as an organization, we're very organized and top of our stuff. um, and another corny example to kind of like really drive it home. The PM, you are the PM. As the PM, you're asking the designer, hey, how are the designs for the new home screen coming along? The designer's like, oh, well, I've been working on the map designs for the last 2 weeks. The PM's, how come? I thought we discussed we were going to do the home screen redesign. Designer's like, yeah, but engineering told me the map designs were urgent and they were blocking people. I did send you a Slack message about working on maps. The PM is shuffling through Slack because they get a ton of Slack messages. And like, oh, I see it. I thought this was something you needed to spend a few hours on, not weeks. I would have objected and had I known otherwise. So there was a misunderstanding, and someone ended up spending time on something that was not a priority. Now, and this example also shows that life is complicated. Like, the designer is reacting to the engineer saying that they are blocked, or some other third constraint which the PM may not have been in the room to understand and discuss at the time it happened. So with trackers, the designer is, hey, I got a request from, I'm changing up the wording a little bit, got a request from engineering to unblock them on the map project, going to hop on that. And the PM says, makes sense, make sure you update the tracker with the new ETAs and tasks. Now, as a PM and you have these trackers in place, you'll probably be looking at them regularly just to monitor stuff. And whenever you look at them next morning or next week, whenever you go, oh, how come the home screen designs are running 2 weeks late? Because the designer updated that in the tracker when they slotted in the work they were doing for the map project. The designer is like, oh, I jumped on the map project, we discussed this, and that will take 2 weeks. And as the PM, you've caught that miscommunication and that potential delay much sooner, because you were enforcing a stricter discipline where everything was being logged before it was being worked on. Or if expectations were changing, there was a process where someone was updating something and you got that notification whenever you read the tracker that, oh, something is changing. Why is it changing? Let me investigate and rectify if need be. So you're just getting that push on expectations are mismatched earlier, and you got that earlier. So that's one example of having trackers in place. And here's another example that really drives this fact home. Um, Sometimes I'll get pings from directors saying, oh, this project was supposed to end in February, but it's May. Looks like this project is getting expensive, because they're assuming people were still working on it, and people are spending too long on it. And at some level, as a PM, your delegation is ineffective if you're not able to kind of create that value for the same promised amount of cost, but the cost is increasing and the value add is being delayed. So you as a PM, just open up your tracker, because you don't have everything in your head, and you're able to, if you have a fancy tracker like, I don't know, monday.com or Airtable or Jira, you're able to like understand that, oh, total costs are actually only up by 5%, which is amazing for like a project costing 5% more than estimated. That's great. But the fact is, the project is running behind by 2 months because the resources on the project got taken up by some other higher priority project. So you're able to like address the director's questions around cost of the project, to be like, cost hasn't gone up, timeline's been pushed back. And you just, maybe you would be able to figure this out without a tracker, but with a tracker, you can't anticipate what questions the director will ask you. But like with a tracker, you have more information, so you're more likely to be able to get that information. And this makes you look good to your stakeholders. And they have this feeling that, oh yeah, like the PM is delegating tasks in an organized manner, and it's an efficient project. um, yeah, so that's another example. um, this one, yeah. All right, so the idea here is to motivate the people you are delegating tasks to, and you are using feedback as a motivational tool. Now again, this is not rocket science, it's just something that gets overlooked a lot, which is why I like to point it out. Is when you're working with someone repeatedly, one idea is you should keep giving them feedback on what they're doing well and what they could do better in a one-on-one situation, in like a private chat or a direct message. um, and if they've been going above and beyond or doing things well consistently, do send their manager a note with some examples, uh, along with the good and constructive feedback that you have for them. And this technique goes to a very basic psychological need, which is people like being praised for a job well done, either in person, or you can praise them to their boss. People appreciate that, and it is a motivating factor for them continuing to do a better job. It also gets the managers of these people to like you more, since you are providing um, written feedback for these people that they can use for their promotions, or to like help them grow in certain skills. So it's just more data points for them, and it makes their job easier. um, and an unintentional side effect of this is that I've seen is, people are more likely to pay attention to your work or prioritize your work because they're anticipating you may be sending a note to their manager or anticipating praise. I've just seen that like they pay more attention to the work you're giving them, and at times a lot of these people might have multiple people giving them work. um, and I think this is the best reason to do it. Is it just helps your team grow. You're giving people feedback, so people are just becoming stronger and better over time, and that makes your team more effective. This one, I didn't feel like there was the need for examples. It felt like a very straightforward technique, so I don't have any examples that I thought were necessary for this one. Um, and this is the last one. Um, I call it speak their language, and it's centered around this idea that people, like maybe product managers or engineers or designers, they're coming from a different mindset with a different set of constraints, wanting to optimize for different things. So they speak about things differently, they assign importance to different things differently, but the underlying psychological principle here is that you are more likely to listen to and accept decisions that you feel have fairly considered your point of view. If you feel like you haven't been listened to and someone's just made a decision and they're missing context, and you think you have context that um, they should know, then uh, they will spend some time and energy focusing on making sure, like to the third point here, um, that they get heard or their point of view gets heard, um, more than focusing on the task at hand. And it is like a deviation in focus from the task you have delegated to them. But if they feel like you have kind of heard them, and you know where they're coming from, which is what I call speaking their language, that increases their motivation to work on the things, because it just feels more fair and logical from their point of view. And coming to the fourth and the fifth point, sometimes it's not always possible to have agreement with everyone. Sometimes you will have to disagree with people, and then it's important to get to an explicit disagree and commit, like, hey, we disagree on this thing. I get that. but this is the decision. Since I am the decision maker in this room, or you are the decision maker, then that's the decision. And have that be out there, than to let things be bottled up and the other person feeling you just don't understand where they're coming from, or they don't feel heard. And you can use in a lot of situations where you will be the decision maker, you will have a room. Let's say you're working with your engineering team, there'll be like 5 or 10 people who disagree with you, but you are the decision maker, and you don't want to really annoy people. So you can go back to the fundamentals and tie your decision back to what is best for the business, or what is best for our users. And when you're able to tie things back to the best for business, best for users, you'll see that the amount of pushback you get will go down pretty significantly. Right. Oops. All right. And then here's like an example of what I mean um, by speaking their language is, as a PM, you're going to your engineering team and like, this is what you need to get done, or this is how you say it. We need to launch the new purchase flow in 2 months. And maybe people have other expectations, or other things have been promised that this is coming as a shock, and people are like, wait, what, where is this coming from, what? And but here's a slightly better way. And let's say the imaginary disagreement or hypothetical disagreement in this example is, people have been wanting to do an infrastructure overhaul project. So you start by acknowledging, you anticipate that that's what the room will react to, and you start by acknowledging that, hey, I know this quarter we wanted to do the infrastructure overhaul, and we wanted to do it for the last 2 quarters, but it got put off. But with our, and here's where you're like acknowledging kind of their point of view, but also sharing your constraints and goals a little bit more deeply. Our competitors launching the new flow with the new features that compete with us in 2 months, it's absolutely critical for the growth of the business. Again, you've made what's best for the business centered in that argument. Um, and then you tie off with, yeah, that you understand that this is not the best news, but this is what the right thing to do is. This is the logical best for business thing to do is. So that's an example of how you can kind of change your phrasing to speak to your audience, or speak the language of your audience, to get them to be a little bit more motivated and accepting of the tasks you are delegating to them. um, that's all I had to share in terms of tips. But and thanks for listening to sitting through that.